The morning sun cast a golden glow over London as thousands of people lined the streets leading to Westminster Abbey. Flags waved in the gentle breeze while excited voices filled the air. Everyone had been waiting for this moment, a piece of history that would be remembered for generations to come. The coronation of King Charles III was about to begin, and the world watched with anticipation. Inside Kensington Palace, preparations had been underway since dawn. The household staff moved quietly through the corridors, making final arrangements. In the private quarters, Kate stood before a tall mirror, her reflection showing a woman of grace and composure. Her ivory gown, designed by Alexander McQueen, featured intricate embroidery that caught the light with every subtle movement. The dress was a masterpiece of British craftsmanship, with delicate silver threadwork forming patterns of roses and thistles along the bodice. Her hair was styled in an elegant updo, adorned with a stunning headpiece that sparkled beneath the chandelier lights. Kate took a deep breath, steadying herself for the day ahead. This was more than just a royal ceremony. It was a moment where her family would step into their roles before the entire world, where her children would experience something they would carry with them forever. In the adjacent room, Prince William adjusted his ceremonial robes. The rich crimson velvet felt heavy on his shoulders, a physical reminder of the weight of duty he carried. He fastened the golden clasps with practiced precision, his mind focused on the significance of the day. As the heir to the throne, he understood that this coronation marked not just his father's ascension, but also his own journey closer to the crown. Yet in this moment his thoughts were equally occupied with his role as a father. Young Prince George stood nervously in his formal attire, tugging at his collar. At his age, the formality of royal occasions still felt somewhat uncomfortable. His jacket was perfectly tailored, and his shoes were polished to a mirror shine. William approached his eldest son and knelt down to his level, placing a reassuring hand on the boy's shoulder. He spoke words of encouragement, reminding George that he was not alone, that his family would be right there beside him throughout the entire ceremony. Princess Charlotte twirled in her white dress, the skirt flowing around her like clouds. She was excited rather than nervous, her eyes bright with curiosity about the grand event. Her dress was adorned with delicate floral embroidery, and a small silver tiara rested in her neatly styled hair. She had been practicing her curtsy for weeks, determined to do everything perfectly. Charlotte understood, even at her young age, that today was special, that people all over the world would be watching. Prince Louis, the youngest of the three, bounced on his toes with barely contained energy. Keeping him still had been a challenge all morning. His miniature suit was identical to his brother's, though he wore it with considerably less patience. Kate smiled at her youngest child, knowing that the long ceremony would test his ability to sit quietly. She had prepared small activities to keep him occupied, understanding that expecting perfect behavior from such a young child during hours of formal proceedings was unrealistic. The family gathered in the drawing room for a final moment together before departing. William looked at his wife and children, feeling a surge of pride mixed with protective love. Kate met his eyes, and in that silent exchange, they shared the understanding that they were in this together. Whatever challenges the day might bring, they would face them as a united family. Outside, the convoy of vehicles waited. The route to Westminster Abbey had been carefully planned and secured. Thousands of police officers lined the streets, ensuring safety while allowing the public their glimpse of history. The crowd had been growing since the early morning hours, with some dedicated royal watchers camping overnight to secure the best viewing spots. As the family prepared to leave, staff members did final checks. Security personnel communicated through earpieces, confirming that everything was ready. The timing had to be precise, choreographed down to the minute. There was no room for delays or mistakes on a day of such international importance. Kate took Charlotte's hand while William guided George. A nanny walked closely behind with Louis, ready to assist if the young prince became overwhelmed. They made their way through the palace corridors, their footsteps echoing on the polished marble floors. Staff members they passed bowed or curtsied, acknowledging the future king and his family. The heavy palace doors opened, and the sounds of the crowd outside grew louder. Camera shutters clicked rapidly as photographers jostled for position. News reporters spoke into microphones, describing the scene to audiences watching from around the globe. The atmosphere was electric with anticipation. William helped Kate into the state car, its interior luxurious with leather seats and polished wood accents. The children climbed in, their faces pressed against the windows to see the crowds. George waved tentatively, and the gesture was met with enthusiastic cheers. Charlotte waved more energetically, delighted by the response. Even Louis managed a small wave before becoming distracted by the interesting buttons and handles inside the vehicle. As the convoy began to move, Kate looked out at the sea of faces. British flags mixed with flags from Commonwealth nations and countries around the world. People held cameras and phones high, trying to capture the moment. Some waved enthusiastically, while others simply stood in respectful silence, taking in the historic significance. The journey through London's streets was both familiar and surreal. These were roads the family had traveled countless times, yet today they were transformed. Every building was decorated with bunting and flowers. Giant screens had been erected at various points along the route, so that those further back in the crowds could still see the proceedings. William pointed out landmarks to the children, using the opportunity to teach them about their city and its history. He showed them where past coronations had been celebrated, where monarchs had traveled on similar journeys. George listened intently, his earlier nervousness giving way to fascination. This was his heritage, his future unfolding before his eyes. Kate held Louis on her lap as he began to fidget. She whispered stories to him, keeping his attention focused. She had learned through experience how to manage her children in public situations, finding the balance between maintaining dignity and being a present, attentive mother. It was a skill she had developed over years of royal duties, and one that would be tested today. The towers of Westminster Abbey came into view, and the family fell silent. The ancient building stood magnificent against the sky, its Gothic architecture a testament to centuries of British history. This was where kings and queens had been crowned for nearly 1,000 years. Today, it would witness another chapter in that long, storied tradition, and the Wales family would play a central role in the ceremony. The state car slowed as it approached Westminster Abbey, and the magnitude of the moment settled over the family. Outside, dignitaries from every corner of the globe had already taken their places inside the ancient church. World leaders, members of royal families from other nations, and distinguished guests representing various organizations and charities filled the historic pews. The guest list read like a directory of global influence and power. Security personnel opened the car doors, and William stepped out first. The crowd's roar intensified, a wave of sound that seemed to physically wash over them. He turned to help Kate, extending his hand as she gracefully emerged from the vehicle. The cameras captured every angle as her gown caught the light, the intricate embroidery shimmering brilliantly. She smiled warmly at the crowds, that genuine smile that had endeared her to people worldwide. George stepped out next, his young face serious with concentration. He had been preparing for this moment, understanding that eyes would be upon him. As third in line to the throne, his presence at the coronation carried particular significance. He stood tall, mimicking his father's posture, trying his best to embody the royal bearing that had been gently taught to him since birth. Charlotte emerged with confidence, her dress flowing elegantly as she took her place beside her brother. She had inherited her mother's natural grace and seemed to understand instinctively how to move in formal situations. Her smile was bright and genuine as she looked around, taking in the magnificent scene. She curtsied slightly to some of the senior officials waiting to greet them, a gesture she had practiced countless times. Louis was lifted out carefully, and immediately his eyes widened at the spectacle before him. The soaring architecture of Westminster Abbey, the crowds of people in their finest attire, the guards in their ceremonial uniforms, everything was overwhelming for a child his age. Kate kept a gentle hand on his shoulder, grounding him, providing that maternal comfort that would help him navigate the long hours ahead. The family paused at the entrance of the Abbey, waiting for their cue to proceed. This brief moment allowed the photographers to capture the scene, a historic image that would appear on front pages around the world. William stood protectively beside his family. Kate held Louis's hand while Charlotte and George stood together, all of them framed by the magnificent Gothic archway of one of England's most sacred buildings. Inside the Abbey, the atmosphere was hushed with reverence. Light streamed through the stained glass windows, casting colorful patterns across the stone floor. The air was thick with the scent of flowers, hundreds of arrangements that had been carefully selected and placed throughout the church. Every detail had been meticulously planned, from the music to the seating arrangements, from the religious texts to be read to the exact positioning of the crown jewels. As the family entered, all heads turned. The assembled guests rose to their feet, a gesture of respect that created a soft rustling sound throughout the vast space. William guided his family down the aisle, their footsteps barely audible against the ancient stones. George walked with careful dignity, remembering everything he had been taught about royal protocol. Charlotte followed, her head held high, occasionally sneaking glances at the magnificent surroundings. The family's procession was timed to perfection, coordinated with the musical arrangements being performed by the orchestra and choir. The music swelled as they walked, adding to the emotional weight of the moment. Kate felt tears prick at her eyes but maintained her composure. This was history unfolding, and her children were part of it. She thought about how they would remember this day decades from now, how they would tell their own children about the coronation of their grandfather. They reached their designated seats in the front section of the abbey, positioned where they would have a clear view of the entire ceremony. The seats were covered in rich velvet, and small cushions had been placed for the children to help them see better. Staff members had discreetly positioned items that might be needed throughout the long ceremony, ensuring the family would be comfortable. William helped Louis into his seat while Kate settled Charlotte and George. She whispered final reminders about behavior, but her tone was loving rather than stern. She knew her children well enough to understand that they would do their best. Any small mishaps would be forgiven. They were still children after all, learning to navigate a world of ancient tradition and modern scrutiny. The abbey continued to fill with the remaining guests. Celebrities and dignitaries, religious leaders and military officials, each took their place in the carefully orchestrated seating arrangement. The choir, dressed in their traditional robes, stood ready to perform pieces that had been selected months in advance. The orchestra tuned their instruments, creating a soft background hum that added to the anticipation. Outside, the bells of Westminster began to ring, their deep tones reverberating through the London air. This was the signal that the ceremony would soon begin. In homes and public spaces around the world, millions of people turned their attention to screens broadcasting the event. In Britain, entire neighborhoods had organized viewing parties. Streets had been closed for celebrations, and a sense of national unity permeated the atmosphere. Back inside the abbey, King Charles was preparing in a private chamber. He wore the traditional crimson robe, his expression reflecting the gravity of the moment. This was the culmination of a lifetime of preparation, the moment when he would formally accept the responsibilities passed down through generations of monarchs. His thoughts likely wandered to his mother, Queen Elizabeth II, whose remarkably long reign had ended, making this day possible. The weight of following such a beloved monarch rested heavily on his shoulders. Queen Camilla was also preparing, her own robes equally magnificent. She would be crowned alongside her husband, a moment that carried its own historical significance. Staff members made final adjustments to her attire, ensuring everything was perfect. She took deep breaths, centering herself for the hours of ceremony ahead. In the abbey, William glanced at his father's empty throne, soon to be occupied. He felt the connection to history, the unbroken line of succession that stretched back centuries. He thought about his own future, knowing that one day he would sit in that very chair, that his son George would eventually follow. The continuity of the monarchy, its ability to adapt while maintaining tradition, was never more apparent than in moments like these. Kate noticed William's thoughtful expression and reached over to squeeze his hand. They shared a brief smile, a moment of private connection amid the public spectacle. Their relationship had always been grounded in genuine partnership, and that strength served them well in navigating the unique challenges of royal life. Charlotte whispered a question to her mother, curious about some aspect of the ceremony. Kate answered quietly, using the opportunity to educate her daughter about the traditions they were witnessing. George sat very still, his eyes taking in every detail, filing away memories that would shape his understanding of his future role. Louis fidgeted slightly but remained relatively calm, occasionally distracted by the grandeur surrounding him. The music shifted, signaling a change in the ceremony's progression. The assembled guests fell into complete silence, a hush of anticipation that filled every corner of the ancient building. This was the moment everyone had been waiting for, when the king would make his entrance and the formal coronation ceremony would truly begin. The great doors of Westminster Abbey opened once more and the procession began. Members of the clergy entered first, carrying ceremonial items that would be used throughout the service. Their robes flowed behind them as they walked in measured steps, their faces solemn with the weight of their sacred duties. Behind them came representatives from various Commonwealth nations, each carrying their country's symbols and wearing traditional dress that represented the diversity of the realm. King Charles appeared in the doorway, and the choir's voices rose in a magnificent anthem that had been composed specifically for this occasion. The sound filled every corner of the abbey, powerful and moving. He walked slowly, deliberately, his bearing regal yet somehow approachable. This was a man who had waited decades for this moment, who had prepared his entire life for the responsibilities he was about to formally accept. William felt his throat tighten with emotion as he watched his father process down the aisle. Their relationship had weathered many storms over the years, evolved through personal tragedies and public scrutiny. But in this moment, William felt nothing but pride and a deep sense of family connection. He glanced down at George, wondering if his son understood that he was watching his grandfather, and that one day in the distant future, George himself would walk this same path. Kate noticed the emotion in William's face and felt her own eyes becoming moist. She had become part of this family, had learned its traditions and accepted its burdens. She had watched Charles prepare for this role, had seen him dedicate himself to various causes and charities, always working to make a difference. Today was his vindication, his moment to finally step fully into the role he had been preparing for his entire life. Charlotte leaned toward her brother George and whispered something. He nodded seriously, both children understanding at some level that they were witnessing something extraordinary. The education they had received about royal history suddenly became real, tangible, as they saw the ancient traditions being carried out before their eyes. The ceremony proceeded with intricate precision. The Archbishop of Canterbury, resplendent in his ceremonial vestments, began the religious service with prayers and blessings. His voice, amplified throughout the abbey, spoke words that had been used in coronations for centuries, connecting this modern ceremony to countless others that had come before. Various religious leaders from different faiths participated, reflecting the diverse nature of modern Britain and the Commonwealth. Each brought their own traditions and blessings, creating a ceremony that honored the past while acknowledging the present. This inclusion was important to Charles, who had long advocated for interfaith dialogue and understanding. The congregation responded at appropriate moments, their voices joining together in hymns and prayers. The acoustics of Westminster Abbey made even simple responses sound magnificent, the stone walls carrying the sound upward to the vaulted ceiling. Outside, the ceremony was broadcast on large screens, allowing the crowds to follow along and participate in their own way. Louis began to show signs of restlessness, his young body not accustomed to sitting still for so long. Kate quietly provided him with a small activity book that had been discreetly tucked into their seating area. It was a delicate balance, keeping him occupied without causing a distraction. She was acutely aware that cameras might occasionally pan to the family, that every action would be observed and analyzed. The most sacred moment of the ceremony approached, when the crown would actually be placed upon the king's head. The atmosphere in the abbey shifted, becoming even more reverent if that were possible. The crown jewels had been brought forth, each piece glittering with centuries of history and priceless gems. The St. Edward's crown, the centerpiece of the ceremony, sat on a velvet cushion waiting for its moment. The Archbishop lifted the crown carefully, holding it high for all to see. Light caught the precious stones, sending sparkles of color throughout the abbey. This crown had been used in coronation since 1661, a physical link to Britain's long royal tradition. Its weight was significant both literally and symbolically, representing the heavy responsibilities of monarchy. As the crown was slowly lowered onto King Charles's head, the moment seemed to stretch and compress simultaneously. Time felt both frozen and fleeting. William watched intently, knowing that one day, many years from now, this same crown would rest upon his own head. The thought was both inspiring and daunting. The congregation erupted in a traditional cry of "God Save the King." The words echoed throughout the abbey and were taken up by the crowds outside. Bells began ringing again, a joyous cascade of sound that spread across London. In other parts of Britain and throughout the Commonwealth, similar celebrations erupted. Gun salutes were fired, marking the moment with thunderous booms. Charlotte's eyes were wide with wonder as she took in the spectacle. She would remember this moment forever, the precise instant when her grandfather became king in the fullest sense. George sat very straight, understanding the gravity of what he was witnessing. Even Louis stopped fidgeting, captured by the dramatic moment. Queen Camilla's coronation followed, her own crown being placed with similar ceremony but slightly modified traditions. She looked dignified and composed, accepting her new role with grace. The sight of both monarchs crowned and seated on their thrones was powerful, an image that would be reproduced in history books for generations to come. The religious ceremony continued with communion and additional blessings. Various dignitaries approached the throne to pay homage, pledging their loyalty and service. William would soon be called upon to make his own pledge, a moment he had been preparing for emotionally and practically. When his turn came, William rose from his seat. Kate gave his hand a final squeeze of support before releasing it. He walked forward with measured steps, every eye in the abbey upon him. This was not just the heir pledging loyalty to the king. This was a son honoring his father. The personal and the ceremonial merged into one powerful moment. William knelt before his father, placing his hands between the king's hands in the traditional gesture of fealty. His voice was clear and strong as he spoke the ancient words of the oath, promising to be the king's liege man of life and limb. But there was also emotion in his voice, a tremor that spoke to the deeper feelings beneath the formal words. King Charles looked down at his son, and for a brief moment, the ceremonial masks slipped. There was a father looking at his child, pride and love evident in his expression. He placed his hands on William's head in blessing, and some observers noticed moisture in the king's eyes. It was a human moment within the grandeur, a reminder that beneath the crowns and robes were real people with real relationships. William rose and kissed his father's cheek, a gesture both traditional and personal. As he returned to his seat, Kate saw the emotion on his face and reached for his hand again. They sat together, connected, as the ceremony continued around them. Their children watched, absorbing lessons about duty, family, and history that no classroom could ever teach. The ceremony continued with additional rituals and presentations. Various symbols of authority were bestowed upon the king, each representing different aspects of his role and responsibilities. The orb representing Christian sovereignty over the world, the scepters representing temporal and spiritual power. Each item was presented with elaborate ceremony, the significance carefully explained by the archbishop. Music swelled at appropriate moments, the choir and orchestra performing pieces that ranged from ancient to contemporary. Some hymns had been sung at every coronation for centuries, while others had been specially composed for this occasion, blending tradition with modernity in a way that reflected Charles's own approach to monarchy. As the religious ceremony drew toward its conclusion, the atmosphere in Westminster Abbey remained charged with significance. Every prayer, every hymn, every ritual gesture carried the weight of centuries. The assembled guests had been seated for hours, yet few showed any signs of restlessness. They understood they were participating in something rare and extraordinary, a moment that transcended the ordinary passage of time. Kate glanced at her children, assessing how they were managing. George remained attentive, his young face serious as he continued to absorb everything happening around him. She felt a surge of pride seeing her eldest son handle the situation with such maturity. He was growing into his role, learning what it meant to be a future king, not just through lessons but through lived experience. Charlotte had maintained her composure beautifully throughout the long ceremony. She sat with excellent posture, occasionally whispering questions to her mother but always in a respectful, quiet manner. Kate answered each query patiently, using these moments as teaching opportunities. Charlotte's natural curiosity was one of her most endearing qualities, and Kate wanted to nurture that while also instilling an understanding of royal protocol. Louis had managed better than anyone might have expected for a child his age. There had been a few moments of fidgeting, a couple of whispered complaints about being tired, but overall he had shown remarkable patience. Kate knew that the preparation had helped, the conversations they had had with him about what to expect and why it was important. Still, she could see he was reaching the limits of his endurance. The final prayers were offered and the Archbishop gave his closing benediction. The service was complete. King Charles and Queen Camilla rose from their thrones, both crowned and now fully invested with all the symbols of their authority. They began the procession, walking back down the aisle of Westminster Abbey as the choir sang a triumphant anthem. The Wales family stood as the King and Queen passed their row. George and Charlotte executed perfect bows and curtsies, while Louis managed a somewhat wobbly bow that was nonetheless earnest in its attempt. Charles caught his grandchildren's eyes as he passed, and despite the formality of the moment, his expression softened with grandfatherly affection. Once the newly crowned monarchs had processed out, the other guests began to file out in carefully orchestrated order. William and Kate waited their turn, helping their children prepare for the next phase of the day. They would be joining the procession back to Buckingham Palace, where the traditional balcony appearance would take place. As they emerged from Westminster Abbey, the roar of the crowd was even louder than before. The coronation was complete, and the people wanted to celebrate their new king. The Wales family made their way to their designated carriage, a beautifully restored vehicle that would be part of the ceremonial procession through the streets of London. The children's excitement had returned now that they were moving again. Being outside in the fresh air, seeing the enthusiastic crowds, all of it reinvigorated them after the long hours sitting inside the Abbey. Charlotte waved enthusiastically at the people lining the route, delighted by their cheers and waves in return. The procession made its way through London's historic streets, following a route that had been used for royal occasions for generations. Every vantage point was packed with people. Some had climbed trees or perched on lampposts for a better view. Buildings along the route were draped with flags and decorative bunting. Street performers entertained the crowds while they waited, and food vendors did brisk business. Inside the carriage, William pointed out various landmarks to his children, sharing stories about previous royal processions and significant historical events. He wanted them to understand that they were part of a continuing story, that the traditions they were participating in connected them to centuries of British history. Kate watched the crowds with a mixture of emotions. She had grown accustomed to public attention over her years as a royal, but moments like these still felt surreal. She thought about the young woman she had been when she first met William at university, never imagining that one day she would be riding in a coronation procession, her children potentially future monarchs themselves. The journey to Buckingham Palace seemed to pass both quickly and slowly. There was so much to see, so many faces in the crowd, each person there to be part of this historic day. The atmosphere was festive, celebratory, with none of the somber tone that had marked the funeral processions of the past years. This was about looking forward, about new beginnings and renewed commitment to service. Buckingham Palace came into view, its familiar facade looking particularly grand for the occasion. The building had been decorated extensively, with enormous banners and elaborate floral arrangements. The gate stood open to receive the procession, and palace staff lined the route in their finest uniforms. The carriage pulled into the palace courtyard, and staff members rushed forward to assist the family in disembarking. There would be a brief respite before the balcony appearance, a chance for everyone to catch their breath and prepare for the final major public moment of the day. Inside the palace, the family was shown to a private room where they could rest. Louis immediately collapsed onto a sofa, exhausted from the long day despite his young energy. Charlotte asked for something to drink, and staff quickly provided refreshments for the entire family. George remained standing, too excited to sit, asking his parents questions about what would happen next. William and Kate took a moment to check in with each other, a brief conversation conducted in glances and quiet words. They were both tired but exhilarated. The day had gone well, their children had performed admirably, and now there was just one more significant moment to navigate. Kate used the time to make small adjustments to the children's appearances, smoothing hair and straightening clothing that had become slightly rumpled during the carriage ride. She wanted them to look their best for the photographs that would be taken on the balcony, images that would appear in newspapers and history books around the world. Outside, the crowd in front of Buckingham Palace had swelled to enormous proportions. The mall was completely packed with people, a sea of humanity stretching as far as the eye could see. Everyone was waiting for the moment when the royal family would appear on the famous balcony, a tradition that had been part of major royal occasions for generations. Inside the palace, word came that it was almost time. The family made their way through the palace corridors, joining other members of the royal family who would also appear on the balcony. There was a sense of excitement mixed with relief that the formal ceremony was complete. Relatives exchanged smiles and brief words of congratulation. King Charles and Queen Camilla were already positioned near the balcony doors, making final preparations for their appearance. Charles looked pleased, the stress of the ceremony behind him, ready to greet his subjects as their crowned king. Camilla stood beside him, her own crown still in place, looking every inch a queen. The Lord Chamberlain gave the signal, and the doors to the balcony opened. The roar from the crowd was deafening, a wall of sound that seemed to physically push against them. Charles and Camilla stepped out first, waving to the assembled masses. The cheering intensified, chants of "God Save the King" rising from thousands of throats. William guided his family out onto the balcony. Kate held Louis's hand firmly, knowing the noise and attention might overwhelm him. George and Charlotte stepped forward confidently, waving at the crowds below. The sight of the young royals brought fresh cheers, people delighting in seeing the next generation of the monarchy. The entire royal family stood together on the balcony, presenting a united front to the nation and the world. Photographers captured the moment from every angle, their cameras clicking continuously. This single image would define the coronation in the public imagination, a symbol of continuity and family unity. The view from the balcony was breathtaking. The mall stretched out before them like a river of humanity. Thousands upon thousands of people all focused on this single moment. British flags waved everywhere, creating a moving tapestry of red, white, and blue. The crowd's energy was palpable, their joy and excitement filling the air like electricity. Charlotte stood on her tiptoes, trying to see everything at once. Her eyes sparkled with wonder as she took in the incredible scene. She waved enthusiastically, clearly enjoying the interaction with the crowd. Kate watched her daughter with a mixture of amusement and pride, seeing how naturally Charlotte seemed to understand what was expected of her in these public moments. George waved more solemnly, mimicking his father's more reserved gestures. William had placed a hand on his son's shoulder, a gesture both protective and guiding. He was helping George understand how to engage with the public, how to acknowledge their support while maintaining the dignity expected of someone in their position. These were lessons that couldn't be taught in a classroom. They had to be learned through experience. Louis proved to be the unexpected star of the balcony appearance. His reactions were completely genuine and unfiltered in a way that only a young child could manage. At one point, he covered his ears against the noise of the crowd, a gesture that was captured by hundreds of cameras and would become one of the most shared images from the entire day. People found his authenticity charming and endearing, a refreshing moment of real childhood in the midst of such formal pageantry. King Charles stood at the center of the balcony, Queen Camilla beside him. He surveyed the crowd with visible emotion, overwhelmed by the support being shown. This was the culmination of a lifetime's journey, and the public's enthusiastic response validated his years of service and preparation. He waved to the masses, his smile genuine and warm. The Royal Air Force had planned a flyover to mark the occasion, and the distant sound of approaching aircraft could be heard over the noise of the crowd. Everyone's attention turned skyward as the formation appeared, modern fighter jets alongside historic aircraft creating a stunning aerial display. The planes roared overhead in perfect formation, trailing streams of red, white, and blue smoke. The children were mesmerized by the spectacle. Even Louis stopped his antics to watch the planes thunder past. The sound was tremendous, vibrating through the air and momentarily drowning out even the crowd's cheers. Charlotte pointed excitedly, and Kate leaned down to share the moment with her daughter, both of them looking up at the sky together. As the sound of the aircraft faded, the crowd's cheering reached new heights. The balcony appearance was a success, a perfect conclusion to the day's public events. But William and Kate knew this was not just a single moment. It was part of their children's ongoing education in what it meant to be royal, to serve the nation, to carry on centuries of tradition while adapting to the modern world. After several minutes of waving and acknowledging the crowd, the family began to retreat back into the palace. The children were reluctant to leave, particularly Charlotte, who wanted to wave just a bit longer. But Kate gently guided them inside, knowing they all needed rest after the exhausting day. Once back inside the palace, the atmosphere relaxed considerably. Family members congratulated each other, sharing observations about the ceremony and the public response. Louis, his energy finally depleted, was carried by William, the young prince's head resting on his father's shoulder. It had been an overwhelming day for such a small child, and he had managed far better than anyone had expected. Staff members offered more refreshments, and the family gathered in a private sitting room. This was a moment for them to decompress, to process everything they had experienced. George asked questions about various aspects of the ceremony, trying to understand the significance of different rituals he had witnessed. King Charles joined them briefly. Still wearing his crown and ceremonial robes, he looked tired but happy, grateful that the day had gone so smoothly. He spent a few moments with his grandchildren, praising them for their excellent behavior and telling them how proud he was of them. These words meant everything to the children, validation from their grandfather that they had done well. Kate excused herself to check on arrangements for the private family celebration that would follow. There would be a formal state banquet later, but first there would be time for the family to be together without the cameras and the crowds. She wanted to ensure everything was ready, that her children could relax and simply be children for a while before any other obligations. William found a quiet corner where he could sit with his thoughts for a moment. The day had been everything he expected and more, emotionally draining yet profoundly meaningful. He had watched his father crowned king, had pledged his own loyalty before the nation, and had guided his children through their first major royal ceremony. It was a day he would never forget, one that would shape his understanding of his own future role. George found his father in that quiet corner and sat beside him. The two didn't speak for a moment, just sat together in comfortable silence. Finally, George looked up at William and asked if he had felt nervous during his pledge to the king. William smiled and admitted that he had, explaining that feeling nervous was normal even for adults, especially during important moments. He told his son that courage wasn't about not feeling afraid or nervous, but about doing what needed to be done despite those feelings. The conversation between father and son deepened, touching on themes of duty, family, and the unique life they led. William tried to be honest without overwhelming his young son, balancing the weight of their responsibilities with reassurance that George didn't have to carry those burdens alone. They were a family and they would face everything together. Charlotte appeared in the doorway, followed by Kate, who was carrying a now sleeping Louis. The little prince had finally surrendered to exhaustion, his formal clothes replaced with comfortable pajamas. Kate smiled at the sight of William and George talking seriously, appreciating these moments of connection between father and son. The family decided it was time to help the children out of their formal attire. Charlotte was relieved to change into something more comfortable, though she insisted on keeping her small tiara on for just a bit longer, not quite ready to let go of the day's magic. Kate helped her change while sharing observations about the ceremony, reinforcing the positive aspects of the experience. George changed quickly, eager to return to the family gathering. Despite the long day, he seemed energized by everything he had witnessed. He had questions about the history of various traditions, about past kings and queens, about what his own coronation might be like someday in the distant future. William answered as best he could, impressed by his son's thoughtful questions and genuine interest. As evening approached, the extended royal family gathered for a private dinner. This was not the formal state banquet that would happen later, but rather an intimate family meal where everyone could relax and reflect on the day's events. The dining room was set beautifully but not ostentatiously, creating an atmosphere that felt special yet comfortable. Louis had been put to bed, too exhausted to participate in the dinner. A nanny sat with him, ensuring he slept peacefully while the rest of the family ate. Kate checked on him once during the meal, finding him sound asleep, his small face peaceful and content. At the dinner table, conversation flowed easily. Family members shared their favorite moments from the ceremony, laughed about small mishaps that the public never saw, and expressed their relief that everything had gone according to plan. King Charles seemed more relaxed now, the official pressures of the day behind him, allowing himself to simply enjoy time with his family. Charlotte entertained everyone with her observations about the ceremony, her child's perspective providing amusing insights. She had noticed details that the adults had overlooked, commented on the beautiful dresses she had seen, and asked innocent questions that sometimes revealed profound truths about the nature of monarchy and tradition. George sat mostly quiet, listening to the adult conversations and absorbing everything. He was processing the day in his own way, filing away memories and lessons that would shape his understanding of his future role. Occasionally, he would contribute an observation or ask a question, and each time the adults gave him their full attention, recognizing the importance of nurturing his development. William looked around the table at his family, feeling a deep sense of gratitude and connection. These were the people who understood the unique pressures and privileges of royal life, who shared the burden of public service, who supported each other through challenges and celebrated together during moments of triumph. Despite the difficulties that had sometimes strained family relationships in the past, tonight they were united. Kate caught William's eye across the table and smiled. She had become fully integrated into this family, no longer the outsider she had once been. She had earned her place through years of dedicated service, through her genuine care for the people she met, through her unwavering support of William and their children. Tonight she felt the full weight of belonging, of being exactly where she was meant to be. As the dinner concluded, family members began to disperse to their various rooms and obligations. Some had to prepare for the formal state banquet, while others were ready to retire for the evening. William and Kate gathered Charlotte and made their way through the palace corridors toward their private quarters. Charlotte walked between her parents, holding both their hands, chattering about everything she had seen and experienced. Her energy seemed endless despite the long day. Kate and William exchanged amused glances over her head, both of them marveling at their daughter's resilience and enthusiasm. They checked on George, who had returned to his room and was looking through photographs from the day on a tablet. Staff members had already begun compiling images from the ceremony, and George was fascinated by seeing himself and his family captured in these historic moments. He looked up as his parents entered, showing them his favorite photographs and asking if he could keep some of them. Finally, they all gathered in the family's private sitting room, Charlotte curled up on the sofa beside Kate, her earlier energy finally beginning to wane. George sat in an armchair, still scrolling through images but growing quieter. William stood by the window looking out at London, where celebrations were continuing throughout the city. The coronation was complete. History had been made, traditions had been honored, and a new chapter in the monarchy's long story had begun. But for William and Kate, the most important thing was that their family had navigated this momentous day together, supporting each other, creating memories that would last a lifetime. Their children had taken another step in their unique journey, learning lessons about duty and service that would shape the people they would become. The days following the coronation brought a different kind of exhaustion. While the physical demands of the ceremony were behind them, the emotional processing continued. William and Kate had learned over years of royal service that major events often had a delayed impact, the adrenaline that carried you through the actual day giving way to reflection and sometimes unexpected feelings. George had become somewhat quiet in the days after the coronation. Kate noticed him spending more time alone, looking at the photographs from the ceremony, seemingly deep in thought. She approached him gently one afternoon, finding him in the palace library with a book about past British monarchs spread open before him. She sat beside him and asked what he was thinking about. George hesitated before answering, then admitted that the coronation had made everything feel more real. He understood in a new way that his life was different from other children's lives, that his future was already determined in ways that his friends' futures were not. There was no resentment in his voice, but there was a weight, a recognition of responsibility that seemed heavy for such young shoulders. Kate listened without interrupting, giving her son space to express his feelings. When he finished, she shared her own experiences of joining the royal family, of learning to balance personal desires with public duty, of finding meaning and purpose in service. She assured him that having complex feelings about his role was normal and healthy, that it was okay to sometimes wish things were different, while still being committed to the path ahead. She reminded him that he had many years before he would need to take on significant responsibilities, that his childhood would be protected as much as possible. She and William were determined that their children would have as normal an upbringing as their unique circumstances allowed. George seemed relieved by this conversation, the burden he had been carrying visibly lightening. Charlotte, in contrast, seemed to have emerged from the coronation experience more confident and engaged. She had loved the pageantry, the beautiful clothes, the attention from the crowds. She asked her mother when the next big royal event would be, already looking forward to another opportunity to dress up and be part of something special. Her enthusiasm brought smiles to everyone around her. Kate gently reminded Charlotte that being royal wasn't just about the grand occasions. She took time to explain the everyday work that royals did, visiting hospitals and schools, supporting charities, meeting with people who were working to make their communities better. Charlotte listened with interest, asking if she could accompany her mother on some of these visits when she was a bit older. Louis seemed to have already forgotten most of the coronation. His young mind moved on to new interests and adventures. He occasionally mentioned the loud planes or asked to see pictures of himself in his fancy clothes. But otherwise the day had faded into his general collection of experiences. His parents were grateful for his resilience and his ability to simply be a child, without the weight of overthinking his role. William spent time with his father in the days following the coronation, helping King Charles settle into his new official role. They had meetings with advisors, reviewed constitutional documents, and discussed the king's vision for his reign. The relationship between father and son had deepened through the coronation experience, the formal ceremony somehow making their personal connection stronger. During one of these meetings, Charles thanked William for his support during the ceremony and throughout the years of preparation. He acknowledged that William's own journey toward kingship would be shaped by different circumstances, that the world would continue changing in unexpected ways. But he expressed confidence that William was prepared for whatever challenges lay ahead, that his dedication to service and his strong family foundation would serve him well. The public response to the coronation continued to unfold through media coverage and public sentiment. The images of the Wales family, particularly the children, had captured hearts around the world. George's seriousness, Charlotte's enthusiasm, and Louis's authentic childhood reactions had all resonated with different audiences. People saw in these children the future of the monarchy, a next generation that seemed both grounded and prepared. Kate read some of the coverage, trying to gauge how the public perceived her family. She was pleased to see that most responses were positive, that people appreciated the balance they were trying to strike between maintaining tradition and allowing their children to be children. There were always critics, people who questioned the monarchy's relevance or who had opinions about royal parenting. But the overall sentiment was supportive. She and William discussed how to help their children understand media attention without becoming either frightened by it or obsessed with it. They wanted George, Charlotte, and Louis to be aware of their public roles without having their entire sense of self-worth tied to public opinion. It was a delicate balance, one they navigated carefully. The family returned to their regular routines as much as possible. George went back to school, where his teachers and classmates treated him normally despite the historic event he had just participated in. His school had been carefully chosen partly for its ability to provide a relatively normal environment, where being royal was acknowledged but not constantly emphasized. Charlotte returned to her activities with renewed energy, throwing herself into her lessons and play with characteristic enthusiasm. She told her friends about the coronation in age-appropriate ways, sharing her excitement without boasting. Her natural social skills helped her navigate these conversations well. Kate and William resumed their royal duties, attending events and meetings that had been postponed around the coronation. They visited communities, met with charity organizations, and continued the work that filled their days. But they also prioritized family time, ensuring that their children saw them as parents first and public figures second. One evening, the family gathered in their private quarters at Kensington Palace. The formality of Buckingham Palace had given way to the more comfortable atmosphere of their actual home. They had dinner together, with no staff except those absolutely necessary, creating a bubble of normalcy in their extraordinary lives. After dinner, they settled in their living room. Louis played with his toys, Charlotte read a book, and George worked on homework. William and Kate sat together, watching their children, feeling grateful for these quiet moments that grounded them. The coronation had been magnificent, historic, unforgettable, but this was what truly mattered. These ordinary moments of family life. William thought about his mother, Princess Diana, and how much she had valued creating normal experiences for him and his brother, despite their royal status. He and Kate were trying to honor that same principle with their own children, giving them roots and stability even as they prepared them for extraordinary responsibilities. Kate looked at each of her children, seeing them not as future royals but simply as her babies, the individuals she had brought into the world and was doing her best to raise well. The coronation had been about history and tradition, but motherhood was about the present moment, about meeting each child's needs, about nurturing their unique personalities and gifts. George looked up from his homework and caught his mother watching him. He smiled, a simple gesture that warmed Kate's heart. In that smile she saw not the future king but her son, the thoughtful, kind boy she was raising. Whatever the future held, whatever responsibilities he would eventually shoulder, right now he was just George, and that was enough. Charlotte abandoned her book and came to sit beside her mother, cuddling close. Kate wrapped an arm around her daughter, breathing in the scent of her hair, feeling the warmth of her small body. These moments of physical closeness wouldn't last forever. Charlotte was growing up, becoming more independent. Kate treasured each cuddle, each moment of connection. Louis toddled over to William, climbing into his father's lap without asking, simply assuming his welcome. William adjusted to accommodate his youngest son, helping him settle comfortably. Louis chattered about his toys, and William listened with genuine interest, asking questions and engaging with his son's imaginative play. As the evening progressed and bedtime approached, Kate helped the children prepare for sleep. She tucked each one into bed, reading stories and singing soft songs. These bedtime rituals were sacred to her, moments when the world outside disappeared and it was just her and her children, connecting in the timeless way of mothers and their babies. Standing in the doorway of Louis's room, watching him drift off to sleep, Kate reflected on the journey that had brought her to this moment. From university student to princess to future queen consort, she had traveled a path she never could have imagined. But through it all, the most important role had been mother, the identity that grounded everything else. William found her there and slipped his hand into hers. Together they stood watching their sleeping son, then moved to check on Charlotte and George, both also now asleep. The coronation had been about the past and the future, about duty and tradition. But these sleeping children were about love, about hope, about the very human heart of an ancient institution. As they finally retreated to their own room, William and Kate talked quietly about the days ahead, the challenges and opportunities that awaited them. But mostly they talked about their children, about how to continue raising them well, about how to prepare them for their unique futures while protecting their present happiness. The coronation was over, but its echoes would continue shaping their lives in ways both obvious and subtle. They had participated in history, played their roles in an ancient ceremony, and done so with grace and dignity. But more importantly, they had remained themselves throughout, had kept their family connection strong, had remembered what truly mattered beneath all the pageantry and protocol. As sleep finally claimed them, both William and Kate carried with them images from the coronation, the magnificent ceremony, the enthusiastic crowds, the historic significance of it all. But mixed with those grand images were quieter ones. George's serious face as he watched his grandfather crowned, Charlotte's joyful waves to the crowd, Louis's innocent reactions to overwhelming spectacle, and the feeling of holding hands as a family, united in purpose and love, ready to face whatever the future might bring.